I only needed shelter. But this old saw had been waiting for me.
She was 20 and homeless. No coat worth naming. No room waiting. No family willing to claim her. Just a canvas tool roll and $5 she had hidden beneath a flour tin. And with that $5, she bought a forgotten Fretwork scroll saw studio outside Grand Rapids, in Kent County, Michigan, abandoned since 1937. The north wall leaned 4 inches outward. Rain had opened the roof above the chimney. The county condemned it on October 3rd, 2022, with demolition planned for the first thaw. But inside the cast-iron treadle box, behind a fitted wall unopened for 85 years, waited money, a silver portrait, and a letter addressed to no name at all. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Ines Maribel Voss had been learning to leave her whole life without knowing it. As a child, she measured seasons by the workbench in her father's shed. Spring smelled of wet pine, summer of shellac warming in a jar, autumn of walnut dust caught in the window screen. Her mother had died before Ines could remember the sound of her laugh, leaving one oval photograph and a blue comb that lived in the top drawer of her father's chest. Her father, Thomas, spoke little, but his hands were plain in their loyalties. He cut bread evenly, sharpened every edge before putting it away, and never passed the cemetery without touching 2 fingers to the brim of his cap. When grief made him quiet, she made something square. Most Saturdays belonged to his older brother, Abel Voss, who worked in a narrow brick shop near the Grand River where furniture plants once sent out carved clock cases and parlour shelves by the wagon load. Abel had a white scar crossing his left thumb and a treadle saw whose iron pedal clicked once at the bottom of every stroke. He taught Ines to drill a starter hole through 1/8-inch walnut, release the blade, thread it through the opening, clamp it again, and test the tension with one careful pluck. Then she would pedal while Abel steadied the wood with 2 fingers, turning the thin sheet slowly enough that the blade followed penciled vines without tearing the bridges between leaves. At noon, they shared apples on the loading step. Before sunset, he swept the mahogany dust into a brass pan and made her inspect every broken blade. Delicate does not mean weak, Abel told her. It means nothing careless was allowed. She understood him when a lace-thin corner survived because her hands had not hurried. Abel died in February 2018 after a winter illness that narrowed him week by week. His landlord cleared the shop before Thomas could settle the account. The treadle saw, the brass pan, the pattern books, and 3 generations of hand-cut templates disappeared into an auction lot. Ines kept only the canvas tool roll Abel had once given her empty except for an awl and a blade wrench. Thomas remarried the following year. Lenora moved through the house without raising her voice, which made every command feel already decided. She counted pantry jars, corrected the angle of chairs, and kept Thomas's pay envelopes in a locked desk. When he became ill, she answered the doctor before he could. She removed Ines's mother's photograph from the mantel because sorrow should not be displayed for guests. Thomas died before dawn on November 14th. 2022. By evening, the front lock had been changed. Ines stood on the porch with Abel's canvas roll pressed under her arm. Through the glass beside the door, she could see Lenora holding the blue comb between 2 fingers, neither using nor returning it. A cardboard box sat at Lenora's feet, empty except for 1 wall sock. The porch bulb buzzed. In the hall, her mother's oval photograph faced the wall. Go now, and take nothing your father owned. Exactly 8 words, spoken without heat. Lenora closed the door. The comb remained in her hand. Ines waited until the new deadbolt turned, then set the empty box upright against the rain and walked away with $5 folded inside her shoe. For 6 weeks she moved east and north by the price of shelter. In Wyoming, she slept behind a laundromat where warm air sighed through a vent until midnight. In Granville, she spent 90 cents on coffee and kept the paper cup because it held heat longer than her hands. 2 nights in a church stairwell ended when a custodian found her and left a blanket without asking her name. She rode the city bus to Walker, then back again when the industrial lots offered no cover from sleet. Her money became $4.10, then $3.25, then $1.80 after bread, an apple, and a packet of aspirin. She learned which library restroom opened first, which diner discarded biscuits in a clean sack, and how to sleep sitting up beneath the fluorescent hum of the transit station. By Christmas week the soles of her shoes admitted water. On December 27th she entered the Grand Rapids Public Library to dry her socks beneath a radiator. At a long oak table beside tax forms and notices for estate sales, a county surplus sheet lay folded under yesterday's newspaper. One line had been marked in blue pencil: Fretwork Studio, Cascade Township, structure only, cash deed $5. Below it, the demolition file number had been stamped in red. She read the line 3 times, then carried the sheet to the reference desk. The librarian, a woman with copper-framed glasses, circled the county office address and slid over a bus schedule. The last transfer leaves at 4. Ines put on her damp socks. $5 was all she had left, and the fare would require walking the final miles. She folded the advertisement into Abel's tool roll, tightened the cracked buckle, and stepped back into the snow. By sunset, the little brick building had become the only door in Michigan she was still permitted to try. The bus carried Ines southeast through streets whitening under snow, then left her at a service station near Cascade Road with daylight thinning. She walked 11 miles by the librarian's penciled route, sleeping midway in a hay barn after the temperature fell to 17 degrees. The hay smelled of mice and dust. Below her, cattle shifted while wind-pressed snow threw a split in the siding. Before dawn she wrapped Abel's canvas roll around one hand and began again. Cascade was waking when she arrived, steam-clouded Brand's Cafe. Milk crates stood outside Duthler's Market. Weller's Gulf had a red pump buried to its handle in snow, while Costa Hardware showed stovepipe and sash cord behind glass. Across the road, Van Houten Feed opened to the smell of oats. Ines passed all 5. Her $5 bill had softened with sweat inside her shoe. The county office occupied a low limestone building with salt crooked across its steps. Inside, radiators knocked behind wooden benches. The clerk sat beneath a green-shaded lamp. A silver braid circled the back of her head, and her brass nameplate read MRS, Eleanor Pike. When Ines placed the notice on the counter, Mrs. Pike looked first at the paper, then at the wet cuffs of her trousers. "You understand the building is condemned?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand there is no power?" "Yes, ma'am." "The well has not been certified in 40 years?" "Yes, ma'am." "And demolition begins with the spring thaw?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Pike held her gaze. $5, cash only. Ines removed her shoe beneath the bench and unfolded the bill. It was worn nearly white along one edge. Mrs. Pike entered the amount in a ledger and brought down a brass county stamp. The blow sounded final enough to close a door, yet the paper she slid forward opened one. "Take Cascade Road east to Thornapple River Drive," she said. "Turn north at the old gristmill foundation. After 9/10 of a mile, look for 2 walnut trees and a stone culvert. The lane is beyond them." She reached for another form, then stopped at the signature. "Voss?" Ines tightened her fingers around the deed. "Was Abel Voss your relation?" "My uncle." Mrs. Pike looked toward the records shelves. "He repaired the fretwork above this window in 1986. Came on a Sunday because the county would not close. He said the old pattern had been cut in that studio by Matthias Voss. Above the window ran a narrow band of walnut pierced into leaves and turning vines. No bridge was thicker than a matchstick. Abel never told me. He did not talk about himself." Mrs. Pike placed the $5 bill in a drawer without mixing it with the receipts. The property belonged to the same workshop line. Taxes swallowed it after the last owner died. I wondered whether anyone would come before the bulldozer. She pushed the deed across. her thumb resting on its corner until Ines took hold. Outside, the snow had stopped. Ines followed Cascade Road with the deed beneath her shirt. At Thornapple River Drive, a neighbour in a brown barn coat split kindling beside a mailbox marked L. Mercer. He raised 2 fingers. His black and white dog barked once and watched her pass. Beyond the culvert, 2 walnut trees stood over a lane, nearly erased by sumac. The studio appeared through the branches. It was brick in front and rough cedar at the rear, perhaps 24 feet wide and 40 feet deep. The roof sagged between rafters, its shingles blackened and missing in patches. A narrow chimney leaned west under an iron strap red with rust. Above the doors, a weathered sign still read Voss Fretwork Studio. One door resisted until she put her shoulder beneath the latch. It opened with a long scrape, releasing air that tasted of cold iron and old wood. Mahogany dust lay across the front room like brown flour, softening a desk, 2 stools, and a row of patterned drawers. Her boots found a loose board that answered with a low complaint. The room smelled of damp brick, mouse nests, and walnut shut away from sunlight. When she touched the desk, the dust beneath her fingers was dry. Somewhere behind the wall, water ticked into a pan. A strip of roof showed pale sky. The back room held the machinery. A treadle scroll saw stood near the centre, its cast-iron frame fixed to the floor. Rust covered the wheel guard and pedal linkage, but the upper arm remained straight. Thin veneer curled around its feet, scattered with broken blades no thicker than dark hairs. Her knees lifted one. It bent against her skin and snapped without sound. She found the well behind the building beneath a pump handle frozen upright. The outhouse door hung from one hinge. There was no food. Blanket. Saw glass in the north window, but the chimney opening had been boarded against birds, and one corner of the front room remained dry. Before nightfall she dragged the desk against the window, swept a space with cedar twigs, and made a bed from feed sacks found beneath the stairs. Hunger sharpened the remembered smell of Brand's cafe. She chewed the last crust from her pocket and listened to the building settle. Cold gathered from the floor upward. She placed Abel's tool raw beneath her head and kept the deed inside her shirt. In the dark, the treadle pedal moved once when wind entered through the roof, lowering with a soft iron click and rising again. Ines lay still until she understood that the sound frightened her less than silence. Delicate did not mean weak, it meant nothing careless had been allowed. At first light, Ines found that the well handle would move if she poured warm water over the hinge and leaned her weight into it. The first bucket came up brown with rust. The fourth ran clear enough to show the dented bottom of the pail, though she boiled every cup over a candle stub before drinking. She reset the outhouse door with a bent hinge pin, then spent 3 days learning the studio by sound, the short cry beside the front wall, the hollow note near the patterned drawers, and the firm boards that carried her safely after dark. On the 3rd afternoon she walked back toward Cascade with the awl in her pocket and the deed folded beneath her sweater. Costa Hardware was warmer than the county office, and twice as crowded. Stove-blacking turpentine lamp chimneys and braided rope-filled shelves to the pressed tin ceiling. Behind the counter stood a broad man with one clouded eye and a sharpened carpenter's pencil tucked through the buttonhole of his vest. Costa? Ines asked. Otto Costa, until supper. She laid out the awl, the broken window latch, and the condemned property notice. Otto read the address, then looked at her hands. You the $5 buyer? I am. You have another 5? No. He nodded, as if this were useful information. From beneath the counter he brought a ruled account book, open to a clean page, and wrote Ines Voss in block letters. 30 days, he said. Pay what you can. Do not vanish. I won't. Most people say that quickly. Ines did not answer quickly. I will come back. Otto drew a line beneath her name. He added a thin manual with a green paper cover. Home repairs for farm and workshop, and pushed it toward her. Water stain on the cover. Pages are sound. No charge. She bought only what the building required first: a chimney brush for $1.85, 20 feet of rope for 60 cents, stove cement for 45 cents, a pound of 8-penny nails for 32 cents, lamp oil for 28 cents, and 2 panes of salvage glass at 75 cents each. Otto wrapped the glass between old seed catalogues and tied the parcel flat against her back. The chimney came before warmth. Ines removed the birdboard, spread damp feed sacks across the hearth, and tied the round steel brush to the rope. The roof was too weak to trust, so she worked from below, feeding the brush upward one joint at a time, twisting clockwise to keep it from unscrewing. Each pull released black scales that struck the sacks like dry leaves. Creosote had narrowed the flue to little more than a handspan near the smoke shelf. Twice the brush lodged, and twice she climbed onto the workbench to gain enough angle to free it. She worked 5 hours the first day and 3 the next. Soot entered her sleeves, settled beneath her nails, and blackened the water in the wash basin before the rag touched her face. When the brush finally rose without catching, she held a mirror beneath the opening and saw a pale coin of winter sky. She sealed 2 cracks at the thimble with stove cement and waited until morning. For the test fire, she used 3 curls of dry walnut veneer, 6 cedar splinters, and 1 broken drawer side split with the awl. Smoke hesitated, folded once beneath the lintel, then lifted cleanly. Ines added wood no thicker than her thumb, and watched the draught strengthen until the flame stood upright. Her first hot meal in the studio was oats boiled in a tin cup with half an apple diced into it. She ate on the floor with the manual open beside her, turning pages with a knuckle so soot would not stain them. Heat reached no farther than 6 feet, but it loosened the frost from one interior brick. A drop ran down the wall and vanished into dust. That evening she began the workroom inventory. The treadle saw held the center, but the room had been arranged around hands rather than machinery. On the east wall hung a bow drill with a bone handle polished smooth at the grip. A brass birdcage awl rested in a leather loop beside 3 fretsaw frames, each lighter than it looked. Beneath the window stood a maple pattern chest containing paper vines, rosettes, clock finials, and 1 border marked Matthias Voss, 10906. A small cast-iron glue pot sat inside a larger water jacket. There was a veneer press with wooden screws, a jar of pumice gone hard, and a narrow bench whose front edge had been cut by thousands of passing blades. She did not touch the treadle saw until the 4th morning. The pedal linkage moved after she brushed rust from the pivot and added 1 drop of lamp oil. The flywheel turned a quarter circle, stopped, then turned farther when she lifted the upper arm. A broken blade remained clamped between the jaws. Ines loosened it with Abel's wrench and laid it on the bench. The wheel guard was a rectangular cast-iron box nearly 2 feet long, bolted around the lower mechanism. Its left side rang solid when she tapped it with the awl. The right side answered with a softer note. She tapped again. Solid near the bolts. Hollow at the center. The manual advised testing rotten beams with a screwdriver, not machinery with an awl, but the principle was honest. She pressed the box with both hands. The right wall did not flex, yet when she lifted from beneath, that side carried more weight than the gears could explain. 4 screws along the lower seam had been painted over. She scraped each slot clean, fitted Abel's blade wrench across the widest, and turned. The first refused. The second moved with a dry squeal. By noon she had removed all 4 and eased away a false iron panel no thicker than a serving tray. Behind it lay a cedar disc fitted flush into the inner wall. The disc had no handle. At its center was a fretwork mark cut as 3 joined leaves. The same turn of vine Matthias had drawn on the pattern paper. Ines pressed the lower leaf. A hidden catch released. The compartment opened inward. She waited before reaching inside. The fire clicked behind her. Outside, thawing snow slid from a walnut branch and struck the roof. The first package was wrapped in oilcloth and tied with linen thread. Inside lay 6 narrow files, a jeweler's hammer, 3-pin vises, and a rosewood marking knife whose edge had been protected with cork. Each tool had been rubbed in wax before storage. No rust touched the steel. A second parcel held veneer sheets between cedar boards, walnut, mahogany, and pale maple, all 1/8 inch thick. Flat after decades, Ines lifted only the top sheet. It gave beneath her fingers like heavy paper. The third object was a small box made from pierced walnut. Its lid carried thin vines crossing at the corners without one broken bridge. Inside, on faded velvet, rested a silver portrait locket. The photograph showed an old man with a white beard seated beside a woman whose hair was parted exactly in the centre. His left hand covered hers. Beneath the box lay a rectangular tin. It was heavier than any tool packet. The lid had been sealed with wax and tied twice with cotton tape. Ines carried it to the front room, set it near the stove, and waited until her fingers had stopped shaking from cold before cutting the first knot. Coins filled cloth rolls marked by year. She counted on the desk, making columns with the awl. $20 St. Gordon's pieces lay in 2 rolls, $10 Indian head eagles filled another. There were $5 Liberty half eagles, silver Morgan dollars, and a smaller paper packet of worn dimes placed between layers of felt. She counted once, then again from the opposite side, then a third time against figures written on the tin lid in faint pencil. The total was $27,100. At the bottom, beneath the final roll, lay a tarnished purple heart engraved Samuel E. Voss, 1944. Its ribbon had darkened almost to brown. Beside it rested one sealed envelope and a folded sheet bearing the same 3-leaf mark. The envelope had no name. On its face, in brown ink, someone had written, "My dear one, W.A. whoever you are." Ines carried the money back to the compartment and replaced every roll in its original order. She wrapped the tools, returned the silver portrait to the walnut box, and set the medal on top of the sealed letter. Then she closed the cedar disc without engaging the catch. She did not read the letter. Night had fallen while she counted. The studio felt smaller with the knowledge of what stood inside it, so she took her coat and walked through the back door to the river. Meltwater moved beneath a skin of shore ice, black and slow, carrying small branches past the reeds. She stood there until the cold reached through her shoes. Across the water, one farmhouse window held a square of yellow light. No road led from where she stood to that window, and she did not need one. Behind her, beneath the damaged roof, the old machinery kept its silence around the unopened page. Delicate did not mean weak. It meant nothing careless had been allowed. Morning entered through the broken north window in a narrow grey band. Ines fed the stove, warmed her hands around the tin cup, and set the envelope beside the silver portrait. When she turned it toward the light, the slant of the capital V stopped her. Abel had written labels that way, lifting the final stroke as though the ink still had somewhere to go. She broke the wax with the rosewood marking knife. "My dear one, whoever you are, if you have opened the wall inside the treadle box, then the shop has accepted a hand more patient than weather. I'm writing from St. Mary's Hospital in Grand Rapids, where Dr. Harold Brenner told me on March 6 that the pain beneath my ribs is cancer of the pancreas, and that my remaining time should be measured honestly." Our line began with Matthias Voss, born near Ulm in 1848, who reached Michigan in 1871 and cut furniture trim by lamplight on Canal Street. His daughter Ruth, born in Grand Rapids in 1878, learned the treadle before women were welcomed at the factory benches. Her son Samuel, born in 1901, carried the patterns to the studio and married Eleanor Pike of Ada in 1924. I am their daughter, Evelyn Voss Mercer, born here in 1925. 4 generations not joined by blood alone, but by the habit of returning a sharpened tool to its place. The trade closed on September 18, 1937. Orders had failed, the roof was leaking, and my father could no longer keep the note. He locked the front door at 5 in the afternoon and never worked the saw again. More than 30 years have passed in silence. Dust has taken the benches, but not the measurements. My brother Samuel Edward Voss was killed near St. Lo during the Second World War in July 1944. The Purple Heart was sent to our mother. She kept it wrapped in his work apron until she died. I put it here because a medal should not vanish inside a dresser owned by someone who does not know the hands named upon it. If you mean to use the old veneers, warm the room to at least 60 degrees before opening their cedar boards. Mix hide glue 1 part dry granules to 2 parts water. Soak it overnight and never heat it above 140 degrees. Tension a fine blade until its pluck is high and brief. At tight turns, keep the treadle even and rotate the wood without pushing. Haste breaks the narrow bridges first. Let every glued fretwork panel remain clamped for 12 hours, even when it appears set sooner. Behind the studio, follow the path to the river until you find the walnut tree with an iron ring grown into its east side. Beneath it is a low fieldstone marker bearing Matthias's 3-leaf mark. I placed no money there. What waits at that tree belongs to memory, not rescue. The coins in this box came from wages, sold furniture, and years of refusing small comforts. Spend them only where work can make shelter, warmth, or another beginning. Inheritance is not possession. It is a task left unfinished by hands that trusted someone else would come. The pierced walnut box was made by my father after my mother lost the use of her right hand. He cut the vines slowly enough for her to hear each turn of the blade. Their portrait belongs wherever the box is kept. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You're welcome here. Evelyn Ruth Voss Mercer, April 2, 1972. Ines read the letter twice. The second time she paused where the paper thinned beneath Evelyn's pen and placed one finger beside the words rather than upon them. Then she folded the sheets along their original creases, returned them to the envelope, and tied the cotton tape around it without making a new knot. She went through the back door before the stove had burned low. The path followed the river, hidden in places by briars and crusted snow. 50 yards beyond the reeds she found the walnut tree leaning toward the water. An iron ring had disappeared halfway into its bark. Beneath the east side, moss covered a field stone no higher than her ankle. She cleared it with her sleeve until 3 joined leaves appeared beneath her hand. Nothing was buried there. She did not search. Back inside, Ines cleaned the old brass glue pot lamp found beneath the pattern bench. Its wick had hardened, but a fresh strip cut from cotton cord drew lamp oil through the burner. She struck a match. The flame rose small and steady, laying warm light across the silver portrait until the old man's hand became visible over his wife's. The room had not saved her alone. Mrs. Pike had kept the $5 bill apart and given exact directions. Otto Costa had opened an account to a stranger whose name filled one line. Clara Green, the librarian in copper-framed glasses, had circled the final bus and asked no humiliating question. Mr. Mercer had lifted 2 fingers beside his mailbox while his dog watched the road, a gesture no larger than permission to pass. There may have been a kindness like that in your own life, a meal left quietly, a fare paid, a door held open when you had nowhere certain to go. What small kindness did someone once give you, and why has it stayed? That night Ines placed the pierced box, the medal, and Evelyn's letter beside Abel's canvas roll. She slept facing them, one hand resting on the floor between the heirlooms and the cold front door. Snow came on December 3rd, 6 inches by noon, laying a clean weight over the roof and revealing every sag beneath it. Ines read the roofing chapter 3 times beside the stove, then climbed only high enough to measure from a ladder, 2 slopes, each 24 by 22 feet. Allowing for waste, she calculated 18 bundles of cedar shingles, 3 rolls of felt, and 12 pounds of galvanized nails. Otto Costa extended the account without comment. When she returned for the second load, she placed a roofing hatchet on the counter. Its leather grip had darkened to the shape of another hand. "My brother's," he said. "He will not need it." At the lane, an old man waited with a coil of rope over one shoulder. Silas Mercer had roofed barns for 42 years and walked with his right knee held stiff. He refused the coins Ines offered. "Your roof cannot wait for pride." They began by bracing the north wall, then lifted a sister rafter beside the split original and bolted the 2 together. Silas snapped a chalk line across the felt. Ines learned to set each nail with 3 strokes, one to place it, one to drive it, one light blow to seat the head without bruising the shingle. That nail's proud. I see it. Pull it. Wind crossed the ridge hard enough to turn their breath sideways. On the 7th day, Ines dropped the hatchet and watched it strike the frozen ground blade first. Silas climbed down, inspected the edge, and handed it back. Tools forgive less than people. They worked 11 days. By December 15th, the final ridge cap lay straight from chimney to gable. Ines stood in the yard while snow began again, watching flakes touch the new cedar and remain outside. January exposed what the roof had hidden. The chimney bricks above the flashing were spalling, their faces lifting away in thin red shells, mortar powdered beneath Ines's thumb. She removed only the loose courses, numbered the sound bricks in chalk, and mixed hydraulic lime with fire clay at 3 parts to 1, adding water until the mortar held a ridge on the trowel without slumping. The temperature stayed in the 20s for most of 3 weeks. She warmed small batches near the stove, carried them up beneath her coat, and laid no more than 4 bricks before her bare fingers went numb. Every 15 minutes she climbed down, held her hands near the fire until pain returned, then went back outside. Silas showed her how to rake the joints to a shallow curve so rain would not settle. Otto found 2 matching bricks behind his store. Ines cut one with a cold chisel, tapping the line from all 4 sides until it separated cleanly. On January 27th, she built a test fire no larger than a dinner plate. Smoke drew upward without folding into the room. Outside, it rose from the repaired stack in one narrow grey column, then disappeared over the walnuts. The floors waited beneath decades of grit. White pine planks ran the length of both rooms, fixed with hand-cut rosehead nails whose dark heads sat unevenly above the grain. Ines set each proud nail with a punch before renting Otto's random orbit sander for $14 a day. The first pass, 80 grit, stripped away soot and old varnish. The second, 120, removed the deep circular mark she had made by lingering too long near the stove. The third, 220, softened the boards until her palm could travel from wall to wall without catching. She vacuumed the dust through a cloth sack and wiped the floor with mineral spirits. The first coat of oil disappeared almost at once. The second remained long enough to reflect the window. After the third, she left the rooms untouched for a 48-hour cure. The pine changed from dark honey toward mahogany, though knots remained nearly black. Abel's treadle saw stood above the finished boards with its rusted feet cleaned but unrestored, as though it had been waiting to see whether the floor beneath it would hold. One morning Ines woke before dawn and could not make her hands begin. She carried the tin cup to the marsh and sat on a fallen cottonwood. A great blue heron stood in the shallows, motionless except for the feathers lifting along its neck. For 3 hours it waited. When it finally opened its wings and crossed the creek, Ines returned to the studio, put away the untouched sandpaper, and did no work that day. February brought light through the damaged windows and cold through every opening. Of the 8 sashes, 3 held no glass, 4 were cracked, and 1 contained an original pane dated 1788 in a faint glazier's mark near the lower corner. Its surface wavered with tiny bubbles. Ines left it exactly where it was. She removed the other sashes one at a time, softened the old putty with linseed oil, and lifted each surviving shard without forcing the points. Fresh glass rested on a thin bed of DAP 33. She rolled the compound between her palms, pressed it into the rabbet, then drew the putty knife in one continuous angle so the line shed water toward the outside. The sash cords had rotted inside the pockets. She replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton cord, lowered each cast-iron counterweight into its channel, and tied a figure-8 knot large enough to seat in the recess without rubbing the frame. On the 7th window, she cut a pane 1/8 inch too narrow and heard it rattle when the north wind rose. She removed it before the putty skinned, measured again, and used the mistake for 2 small cabinet lights. The last sash went in near sunset. As Ines drove the final brad, a chickadee landed on the walnut branch outside. It tipped forward, black cap bright against the snow, and watched her raise and lower the window twice. The sash moved without sticking. The bird remained until she closed it. The plaster failed first beside the chimney. The original walls were horsehair plaster pressed over hand-split oak lath, and the first patch Ines made slid loose before supper. The second cracked overnight. The third held for 2 days, then fell in one pale piece when the stove warmed the bricks. Otto found an old feed bag of horsehair in his loft, saved from his father's upholstery work. Ines washed it, cut it short, and mixed it into lime plaster until the fibres crossed through every handful. She dampened the lath pressed on a scored scratch coat, then laid a 3/8-inch brown coat and gave it 72 hours to cure. The finished coat was 1/8 inch, thin enough to follow the slight waves of the old wall. When it dried without opening, she rested her palm against it. These patches will hold another 100 years. Doris Bell, who owned Brand's Cafe, began leaving paper bags on the doorstep before sunrise. Doris wore her grey hair in a net and carried coffee pots as though they were full buckets. The bags held heel slices, boiled eggs, and once a square of gingerbread wrapped in wax paper. When Ines brought money to the cafe, Doris closed her hand around the coins and placed them back on the counter. "Pay me in candles when the shop reopens." Caleb Mercer arrived one Saturday on a blue Schwinn, a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 16, narrow at the shoulders, with one front tooth chipped into a clean white notch. Without introduction, he split the storm-fallen walnut limbs into stove lengths and stacked them bark side up beneath the eaves. Ines offered him $2 silver from her earned change, not from the cash. He shook his head. "My mother said, about your grandfather." Then he mounted the bicycle and rode away before she could explain that Abel had been her uncle, not her grandfather. Reverend Boyd walked past each morning with a black scarf tucked into his coat and a polished walking stick that clicked at the culvert. He never entered unless invited. He tipped his hat toward the roof, the chimney, or whatever new repair could be seen from the road. On the morning the final plaster coat dried, she paused and raised 2 fingers. "Let good work remain." Ines bowed her head. The prayer was finished before the stove door settled shut. She postponed the cellar until February 11th. The entrance lay beneath a trapdoor behind the pattern chest. 7 granite steps descended to a 12 by 15-foot floor of fitted fieldstone. Meltwater darkened the lowest joints, and roots had entered through the north wall in pale, searching threads. At the centre rested a dressed granite slab, too regular to belong among the fieldstones. Matthias's 3-leaf mark had been carved near one corner. Ines brushed dirt from the outline but did not test its weight. Some doors required more than curiosity. Under the 3rd step, an oak box had wedged between the stringer and stone. Its lid opened on wooden pins. Inside lay a brass key whose bow had been pierced into the same 3 joined leaves. Beneath the key was a tintype dated 1903. A young woman stood outside the studio in a high-collared blouse, one hand resting on a fret saw frame. Her face had Ines's narrow jaw, the same low brow, and the same slight unevenness at the corner of the mouth. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "Ruth Voss, daughter of Matthias, age 25, summer of 1903. Ines carried the tintype upstairs. The key remained on the mantel beside Evelyn's letter. She tried it in no lock. By March, snow retreated into the ditches. The creak grew loud enough to hear from the front room, and the walnut trees loosened green catkins above the lane. Ines cleaned the treadle bearings, polished the blade clamps, and stopped there. She would not begin the full craft that spring. She chose one worn Morgan dollar from the cash and exchanged it carefully for practice veneer, blades, hide glue, and fine drill bits. For weeks she cut only small squares, one leaf, one curve, one narrow bridge. Most broke. A few held. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Ines completed her first full fretwork piece. It was not large. The panel measured 14 inches by 22 and had been cut from walnut veneer backed with pale maple. A vine rose from each lower corner, crossed once at the centre, and opened into 3 leaves taken from Matthias's mark. She drilled 47 starter holes, threaded the blade 47 times, and worked the treadle in intervals so the old iron bearings would not heat. At the final inner turn, the blade snapped. Ines replaced it, returned to the cut, and completed the bridge without widening the line. When she lifted the panel toward the window, winter light passed through the openings and laid a second pattern across the floor. The studio around her had become plain and sound. White pine boards reflected the stove. 8 windows held against the wind. The plaster followed its old uneven course without apology. Pattern drawers stood cleaned and labelled. The treadle saw occupied the centre beneath a shaded lamp. Nothing matched perfectly. Everything belonged. The brass key waited until the walnut tree split. A February storm broke one of its eastern limbs, exposing an iron plate grown beneath the bark near the old ring. Ines trimmed only the torn wood, then found a small keyhole under a crust of rust. The 3-leaf key entered without resistance. Behind the plate was a narrow copper-lined hollow. Inside lay a folded 48-star flag wrapped in oilcloth and a note dated October 9th. One night, 1/8, during the final weeks of the First World War. Ruth Voss had written it while her husband, Daniel Mercer, served with the 32nd Division in France. She wrote that the flag had hung in the studio window since his departure. She did not know whether he would return, only that the workbench must remain ready for either grief or homecoming. If he came back, they would unfold it together. If he did not, the next keeper was to place it where morning light could touch the stars once each year. Daniel returned in May 1919 with damage to one lung. He and Ruth never opened the compartment again. Ines carried the flag inside and unfolded it across the cleaned bench. 48 cotton stars rested in rows, yellowed but intact. On October 9th each year after that, she placed it in the east window until noon, then returned it to the copper hollow with Ruth's note. The purple heart went elsewhere. On July 18, 2024, 80 years after Samuel Edward Voss was killed near St. Lo, Ines carried the medal to Woodlawn Cemetery in Grand Rapids. His name had been cut on the family stone without a body beneath it. She set the medal against the granite, remained until the morning rain stopped, then placed it in a small weatherproof case fixed behind the marker with the cemetery keeper's permission. She used little of the money. One $5 gold piece paid for the chimney bricks. A Morgan dollar bought practice materials. 2 worn dimes were set into the underside of the workbench, where no hand would disturb them. Later, 1 half-eagle covered a new well cylinder after the old pump finally failed. The remaining coins returned to the tin in their cloth rolls. Ines wrapped the tin in fresh oilcloth and placed it behind the cedar disc with Evelyn's letter and a second envelope of her own. Across the new envelope she wrote only 2 words. The next one. The shop reopened without a sign in the newspaper. Doris pinned an index card to the corkboard at Brand's Cafe, hand-cut fretwork repairs. Clock trim. Small puntles. Inquire at the old Voss studio. Beneath it, she left a pencil on a string. By spring, more than 40 names filled a mailing list kept in the pattern chest. Most requested no immediate work. They wanted to know when Ines had enough finished pieces to show. She wrote each address by hand and sent no advertisement beyond that card. Caleb returned in April, carrying a board wrapped in a horse blanket. He had grown broader and wore carpenter's trousers whitened at the knees. Without speaking, she leaned the board against the front wall and removed the blanket. He had carved a new sign in black walnut. Voss Fretwork Studio remained across the top in letters copied from the weathered original. Beneath them, smaller but cut deeper, were 2 new words. And daughters. Ines ran a thumb through the last letter. There has only been 1 daughter here. Caleb took a folding rule from his pocket and checked the sign's width against the doorway. So far, he said. They mounted it beneath the eaves with hand-forged screws. Doris watched from the road, holding a paper bag against her coat. Reverend Boyd tipped his hat. Otto stood beside his truck and pretended to inspect the rear tire until the sign was level. That evening, Ines lit the brass glue pot lamp and opened a fresh sheet of paper. My dear one, whoever you are, she wrote about the roof, the plaster, the cellar slab she had still not lifted, and the pieces she had broken while learning to turn walnut beneath the blade. She recorded the new well cylinder, the location of Samuel's medal, and the date when Ruth's flag should be placed in morning light. She did not write instructions for becoming worthy of the place. Evelyn had not asked that of her. Instead, she described how to warm hide glue without boiling it, how to listen for looseness in an old treadle, and how a narrow wooden bridge could survive when the pressure remained even. She added the names of those who had helped and left space beneath them for other names. Near midnight. She folded the pages and carried them to the treadle box. Delicate did not mean weak, it meant nothing careless had been allowed. She sealed her envelope beside Evelyn's and closed the cedar disc. The catch entered with a quiet click. Outside, creek water moved beyond the walnuts, and the new sign shifted once against its chains before settling. The Fretwork scroll saw studio waits. It has always waited. In the county office, Mrs. Eleanor Pike retired the following autumn. On her final afternoon, she emptied the lower drawers of dried ink pads, broken pencils, and tax notices. At the back of the receipt drawer she found the softened $5 bill Ines had placed on the counter years before. Mrs. Pike left it where it was. The next clerk did the same.